Good morning. Welcome to Between the Covers. I'm David Naiman, your host. Today's guest is Nathan Englander, who burst on the literary scene in 1999 with his story collection For the Relief of Unbearable Urges, a book that earned him the Faulkner Malamud Award, among many others. His first novel, The Ministry of Special Cases, set during Argentina's Dirty War, came out in 2007. But this year is a particularly fruitful one for Englander. His play, The 27th Man, will premiere at the Public Theater in New York this fall, and his original translation of the Haggadah, the prayer book used during the Passover seder, will come out this spring. Nathan Englander is here today on Between the Covers to talk about his third major project to come to fruition this year, his short story collection, What We Talk About When We Talk About Anne Frank. Welcome to Between the Covers, Nathan Englander.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
So the title of your collection explicitly links itself to the title of Raymond Carver's famous collection, What We Talk About When We Talk About Love. What was behind that choice of linking your collection and also linking the title story of your collection to that collection?
Yeah, there's a lot of weight on the title, and I knew that going in. That's in a sense the commitment the book makes. The story itself, which is about a game that I played with my sister that I thought was a game. I mean, it was. In my universe, it's a game my sister made up that was played only in my own home. Now that story was in the New Yorker and the book is out, it's just amazing to hear how many people have some versions of this deeply pathological game. But we would, we're super American, but we were raised very religious and in a sense, raised sort of like children of the Holocaust. We both have shtetl heads, basically, and we would really think, who would hide us in the event of a second Holocaust? Like, who are the righteous Gentiles that would hide us? And like 20 years ago, just talking about a couple we both know, she said he would hide us and she would turn us in. And it just struck me that it struck me that she was right. It ends up being this deep, personal thought, but you're like, oh, he's the kind of guy who would hide you, and she's the kind of person who would turn us in when he went to work. I don't know. It just stayed in my head for 2 decades, and then when I took a half step back, I just looked at that and said, oh, this game it's downright twisted. It's fully pathological. And I thought, what's behind that? I wanted to explore it. The point is the way stories grow, which is this game, this idea, it sits for honestly 2 decades, and then it starts to turn into story. And then I have a couple, and then I make the husband Jewish, and then their friends come, and suddenly someone's got a wig on and the guy turns Hasidic. It's the way story takes shape. But I thought of another story I love fiction, and short stories are so close to my heart. And, it's maybe, I can't think of an American story more legendary from the last 30 years or something than What We Talk About When We Talk About Love. But the story, I hadn't read it. The story, at this point, I probably hadn't read it in 15 years. It had turned to dust. It was gone. It's what fiction does. Like, the story melts away and, just like any other experience, and some of it turns into memory. And that's the point. What I had left from that story was 2 couples, sitting around a kitchen table, a bottle of gin between them, and then there's the motion of light changing through the day. That's that story, is sort of night coming on. And, that's all it was. It wasn't remembered. It was a memory. I just pictured it. And I thought, it was ideas of ownership and identity and all kinds of things. And I thought about marrying the 2 stories, like laying my story onto this very legendary story. And once I did, I went back and read the original and went as far. I thought, if you're going to do this, then do it. So my paragraph ends basically the way Carver's does, which is, about ownership. People from there think it gives them the right. And the doctor, gets to talk about love. It gives him the right. I thought about that ownership. And once I had gone that far, it needed to be the title of the story, and then it needed to be the title of the book, because it's about standing up straight or something. When you write, you're making a commitment, but in every case, thinking about this, if I was going to go as far to echo that story, you better make it clear that that you have done that. I wrestled with this. I just did an event in New York with Colin McCann, and it was really sweet, because when people who are good readers who read you in manuscript, the time to talk to a writer friend about work is in manuscript. You know what I'm saying? You give me your book now, I'm going to say, that's like my mother. That's lovely. Mazal tov. Beautiful book. That's what a finished book is. Always you get a big fat mazal tov. job well done. In manuscript, if you respect someone, you say, I loved it, but, that doesn't work. Or, but Colm fought me. He had read it, he blurbed the book. So he got it really early on. He was an early supporter. And he'd call me and say, you have my support, but please, I beg you. We really talked about it. And then at this first event, we did an event together, and he'd said to me, like, I get it. He said to the audience, I thought he was going to beat me up, in front of the audience. He's like, I fought him on this title. I hated this title. And he said, and now I understand, like, seeing it all together, seeing it done, seeing it out. He understood that, it was about what he was, taking the other side of the argument was like, are you really going to touch that title? And the answer is yes.
Well, there's a lot that I think the whole collection touches on that is brought out in the title story. What we talk about when we talk about Anne Frank, and one of the things is that uneasiness and that tension and the issue of legitimacy between the Orthodox Jewish community and the secular Jewish community, between the diaspora and Israel. And I love the touch that you use in that story around having them smoking pot and raising the level of what they're willing to say and the loosening of their lips around those issues.
Oh, thank you. And that's the other, you make just a point about, before we went on the air, we're just talking about collections, and it's that idea. I really, I never understand this. We were just sort of talking about that strange, I think, like fake conflict or fake there's no, fiction and, short stories and novels are not at war, but this idea where people say, oh, stories. But my point is, I feel like you should get that same experience. You should get the wind knocked out of you, that you better exactly that. Choose a title story carefully, that the stories, it better not be you just hunting around under the bed for manuscript pages. Like, the stories better be of a piece and have that whole, and yes, you can read them out of orders, but the same way I was thinking of that When Harry Met Sally thing, where the person, because that would make me crazy, reads the last page of the novel at first, and then anyone can do anything they want with the book. But that idea that if you read it through, that you should have a complete experience. But to write is to inhabit the gray space. That's what interests me, which is I want a black and white world. I was raised in a black and white world, and maybe every child is, maybe that's the idea why fables work. There's good and there's evil. And I think I'm just really interested lately what these stories are about. I think I can't handle that the world is not a just place. I think I'm obsessive, about ideas of morality and all these, that it obsesses me. But you really need to be able to explore both sides. And I in inhabiting both sides in the story, I'm just interested in, I guess, ideas of ownership. It's because when all this stuff, there's so much. I feel like I will get grouped with books that, revisit ideas of the Holocaust, but I'm revisiting the idea of the Holocaust. You know what I'm saying? It's that idea to me of, I'm just interested in how people use so many important ideas and memories and historical things as a bludgeon, or people take it as their own, say like, how can you write about that? Like anyone who would ever say to me, how can you write about these subjects? And I want to know, like, how have you been granted ownership of these subjects to deem what I may write? It's this very strange thing. I mean, my point is, yes, there's Jews all over the place. There's Holocaust ideas. That's what I write about. But for me, because it's about universals, it's about what I'm living. You want it outside of time. That's what fiction does. But it's, to me, I as soon as I start talking about ownership of the memory of the Holocaust, I start talking about Bible thumping and the Constitution and the forefathers. I look at what's happening in this country, and, I just keep saying again and again, I don't know what to call it, but the embarrassment of American politics today. And to me, it's about that. People, again, running for president, saying what the intent is, what the meaning is, to me, where I just don't understand where that confidence comes from. It almost terrifies me more if they believe what they're saying. If they're being insincere and duplicitous, then I'm actually much calmer. But if people are literally reading, the Constitution and seeing that, or thinking about what it means to be part of a society, saying, I'm the person to run this country, and I think we should, dismantle anything that cares for another or, represents any, kind of civil behavior towards other people or respect for freedom that comes, I'm saying, with democracy, you can have freedom of religion. With some sort of theocratic feudal something that's being put into, I just don't understand how someone, these are smart men. So I really, really just hope they're being duplicitous and thinking, maybe I can pay no taxes and just take. I hope that's what they're thinking in their head, because if they're really thinking this is a way to steer America, or this is actually a fair way to live, or moral or Christian in any way. It's maddening to me. And the point is, that's what I really like to get, again, a world that interests me, to get into people's heads. That's it. I have to play both sides. So I get to say, when you use the Holocaust this way in the first story, or use the memory of it, or use it for identity, what does that mean on both sides? And, so if I was writing a political story, I'd want to be able to really think it through, what it means to say, I don't know what, that we should have basically no federal government, what that, I'd want to believe it when I was writing it. But I guess I always just wonder what's going on in people's heads, and this is how I can see.
In case you just tuned in, you're listening to Nathan Englander. We're talking about what we talk about when we talk about Anne Frank. So, Nathan, in a conversation you had with Zadie Smith, you talked about wanting to bring morality back into fiction and a desire to bring right and wrong back into fiction. Yet you're also talking about wanting to plumb the gray spaces and the ambiguities. And I wonder about that tension, because my favorite story in the collection is Sister Hills, and I really appreciated your courage in going into the issue of the Israeli occupation and creating something that wasn't a political argument and resisted an ability to reduce it to a political argument. I think it invites multiple interpretations, and I think that desire to bring morality into a story must also somehow be tempered, I would guess. Is that true, in order to make it dimensional?
Yeah, well, the point is, I'm a political person, not an actively political person, meaning I feel fiercely political, but then I don't do anything or try to make change. And, I write stories. But that idea of, I can scream and bang a podium, but I'm not really doing it. But my point is, my head is very lit with things political, but I really believe that when you're writing a story, your obligation is to the story itself. It's not my views. I mean, I always use Orwell as the example. He gets to write 1984 and Animal Farm. Not just that he gets to write them, but the reason that they work, the reason they function so well and stand the test of time and are so deeply prescient and seem always applicable, sadly more and more applicable to the times, is because that's how he ticked. You know what I'm saying? It can't be a polemic. It can't be me trying to push an idea. That is corrupting, that sours, that poisons the well. Any intent that I would, like Nathan, me that's talking to you, like now I'm on the radio with you, you're meeting writer guy. This is writer guy me, so the point is, when I'm, there's me, and then there's writer guy me, and then there's me working, which is the absence of me. It's just story. And I think one has to be really careful. And that was the thing that interested me about Sister Hills, or of the things that drew me to it, was I just decided to touch this thing that is, to me, very explosive, to really write the whole history of the settlement movement and the idea of Greater Israel into one story, one short story compressed, and the idea is I literally, it was dizzying during the process. I literally didn't know I've never had no idea myself, the writer guy talking to you, or just Nathan hanging out, those other selves. I've literally never had so little idea what I had or what I was working on, because, I knew that to build that story right, I would just, I don't know, I was going to say, I don't want to say into the radio, I was going to be like, you kind of have to read it, but that's, everyone, read it or don't read it. But the point is, it was so, I'm always pulling my hair out and going crazy and full of pressure when I'm writing. That's the process, and I enjoy that process. But when I finished the story, I did not sleep the night after I finished this draft. I literally did not know what I had. I didn't know if it was, I knew it was something so, exactly that, something so political and something so loaded and something so overwhelming to me, but also that better not seem like my position. My position on the, settlements and the West Bank is totally crystal clear, but I'm not talking about it in interviews because I just want it to be really just to draw a line that there's this story and that's its own thing. And it just what you were sort of saying, that story I've been on the road all week, which is if I'm making any sense to you all, God bless you for listening. I'm so tired. But the point is just that it's been functioning like a Rorschach test. I've never had a story that people read the same story. It's just crazy to me that people read this story and just see what they want to see or see what they want to see that I'm saying. It's been really interesting.
And I think that's what really points to its strength, in my opinion. In case you just tuned in, you're listening to Between the Covers, and we're talking today with Nathan Englander about his story collection, What We Talk About When We Talk About Anne Frank. One of the themes that I think runs through this whole collection is the issue of legitimacy. And I wonder if you see it this way as well. I saw the idea of legitimacy go through this whole piece. And the idea of is your claim to the land legitimate? Are you as much of a Jew if you're a secular Jew? The legitimacy of memory, especially in Camp Sundown when we're talking about elderly campers who are maybe having true or maybe false memories around the Holocaust. And then I loved you had a touch in the story, How We Avenged the Blums, where the man who's referred to as the anti-Semite may have actually been half Jewish on his father's side. So, and maybe he was angry because he was ostracized by the Jews because he was illegitimate, essentially. Do you see that as an organizing principle or a theme that you come back to when you write?
You said that so beautifully, which is positing it. I feel like that all these things, if you're building a world, a world better have everything in it in a sense. Like I may be focusing on one thing. I always feel like I never know I'm working on story and I sometimes am even driven. When for near a decade writing the Argentina novel, I was sure that this book is about, habeas corpus and about governments gone awry and about Argentina. And, as times go by, I'm like, oh, I guess that was a Jerusalem metaphor, or that I didn't know till it was maybe like the last line that I put in the book, which is, I had never acknowledged that the son loved his father. I did not know this was a book about a father and a son. I spent a decade writing it, and now it's so clear to me. So in a sense, I hear you say that is such a lovely read and a generous read and a smart read, and I feel like it's the kind of thing I would take to the next city and be like, this is about legitimacy. But I don't have to know that. But when you say that to me, that doesn't ring. It just doesn't ring as anything but resoundingly true to me. Like that's a great way to state it, because I'm haunted by those things, exactly that, where I say, the ability to say well, there is something threatening to say, does a country have a right to exist because there's millions and millions of people there, 20% of them Arab as well. There's a whole bunch of killing you're going to have to do, to undo that. But yes, the question is, do you belong in Gaza? Do you belong surrounding Gaza? Do you belong in Hebron? What does that mean to, how do you deal with lost land? How do you do swap? How do you make, yes, then there are an infinite number of practical questions involved in all these things. But that's, I get lost. I try to make sense of the gray. I grew up with a black and white world. It's so nice, and I'm not doing that thing. That's why it's always about respect for me. That's the point. I just want respect always to flow in two directions. I find it offensive to religious people when people do that quaint thing. It's so nice to have all the answers, that's a really insulting thing. But my point is, I can say what was nice about black and white is a lot is prescribed. You know where you're going to be on Saturday, and you know what time of day you're praying, and bust out your Talmud. You know which leg of your pants to pull on first. You know which is the dominant arm. Well, all these things are decided for you in a way. So I feel like the idea of finding that there's so much gray space in the world is just, or that the world is not a just place, is somehow both overwhelming and terrifying to me, and also really moving in about the humanity in it. It's what, at least with this book, it's what I just want to look at, exactly that. What is a true memory? What is true ownership? What is true freedom? They're big questions, but it's what I do all day. I'd rather work with the big than the small.
Well, you definitely have, I think, a unique place among American writers who use Jewishness as their material, in the sense that you come from an Orthodox background, but you're secular now, and you've lived both in America and in Israel. Do you ever think about, in a more of a generational sense, for American Jewish writers, whether the concerns for American Jewish writers of this generation, say you and Shaban and Leatham or Marcus versus Roth and Bellow, have changed considerably? Or is that a question you don't even ask yourself?
No, you're so good. These are so generous in the way, you're talking in a way that I think. But the point is, yes, that's what I was going to say. As you were asking the question before you started listing, I wanted to go back to, that Saturday Night Live skit and be like, Jew, not a Jew. They had that game show that caused a whole kind of ruckus back in the 70s, I guess. But that idea, like, yeah, I'm glad, I was hoping you'd throw Lethem in there because he's the perfect example. Like, his mother's Jewish, like, the work itself, is, he does so many, he moves through so many genres. I mean, he's up, the last book's criticism, Jonathan writes everything. The idea of and so little of it is overtly, Jewish in any, we'll see when that novel, I've read somewhere, I'm like, this is a Jewish novel but my point is, that's the idea. What does it even mean to be these things? Or, Ben Marcus is a good example, like where you just listed him, like that's a new Ben Marcus. What I'm saying? He like a narrative Ben Marcus is in, like in the way he was dealing so much more with language and idea and whatever. I'm no critic, but my point is that's the idea. Even one writer, you've got two writers if you take the way he's working now and the way he used to work. And Shaban Michael's a great example too, where it's like Michael's getting more and more in touch, or what in touch sounds, I don't even know what that means. But my point is, interested in these things. Mystery of Pittsburgh is, does not seem a Jewish novel to me. So that's the idea. It's just about where your head's at and what you're writing. My point is, it's so not other. I don't group my shelves that way. I was doing a lot of interviews in New York before I left, and I looked at my shelf and I said, oh, it's, Black Boy is next to Magic Barrel, is next to, a Peter Carey, is next to a Chris Adrian, is next to Gogol's The Note. That's how my categories are. They would take 9 hours to explain why don't touch that shelf. That shelf is carefully curated and it means something to me. But for me, I guess I answer that Jewish question endlessly, which is fair to ask. There's a lot of Jews running around the book. It's just, it is thick with Jews. But the point is, I feel like that's why I never get through an interview without screaming, my parents were born here, my grandparents too, my great-grandparents, it's my great-great, I'm saying my people came in the 19th century. I've been here a long time. And that idea that it's some qualified form of fiction or some qualified form of American, that I don't get to sit here and say, the American right, like, I write short stories like, again, I'm not listing people because then it would be giving myself a compliment or an insult or whatever by who I list. But my point is, you just don't get grouped that way. I don't think anyone says, how did being a Christian in America inform the writing of Blade Runner? You know what I'm saying? It's just, it's futuristic. So I grew up only with Jews. That was my whole universe. Then I went to a school that's all Jews. Then I went to Israel. That's plenty of Jews. Then I moved back to New York, which is lots of Jews. That idea that it's somehow other or genre fiction, or I really think the whole idea, for me, I say the question about Jewish writing to me is just, I finally figured out the answer after 15 years of being asked it, which is, I really see it this way now, really calmly. The question being asked of me is, how has living in the world sparked your imagination? That's how I've decided to hear it. That's just what's being asked. But the idea of generational stuff, I think you can take any grouping of writers and do generational stuff. Like where does that sort of Bartholomew, like 60 stories, like where does that come from? Like that's of a man, but it's also of a time, I mean, I think they're timeless. I still love those stories, but that kind of working with language, I think is of a time where I did not live, and I get it. So yeah, I see the generational shift, but I mean, that's just the grouping. There's, Roth, Malamud, Bella, and I'm glad to be included with fine writers whenever I'm included with fine writers. That's a great thing. But yeah, I feel like it's more just a reflection. I just feel like much like writing is a way of making order out of the world. I think as a reader, I do it to others. I just do it differently, not so much by style or ethnicity or whatever. But yeah, I think it's just a way to make order of the world. The one thing I could say on that, Fred, about generations, I've often felt, I love Roth and I love Malamud, but in terms of experience, I think of them, they were becoming American, and a lot of the writing for them was about that. The comfort that I feel now to say how dare anyone question how totally American I am was because these guys were going to public school and chasing monkey around in Portnoy's Plain and knocking the natural these ideas. They were becoming American. I feel really connected to Singer in a sense. To me, I feel like that was the idea. He grew up, like the book is called In His Father's Court, but that that excitement that he felt to be out in a world that felt broader to him, again, with great respect, it can be a very broad world if that's a world for you. That's what I never lose, that feeling of excitement of being out in the world. And I feel of a different generation when I think about the way I look out my eyeballs.
I'd love to end the interview and talk just briefly about the New American Haggadah and your translation of it. In listening to your interview on NPR on Fresh Air with Terry Gross, she seemed perplexed that you, someone who's chosen to be explicitly secular, would choose to and translate a prayer book for the Passover seder. I didn't find it as perplexing as her, and I was curious. To me, it made a lot of sense that you would choose that of all holidays, because it seems to me like the one Jewish holiday that maybe you could find the most religious and the most secular people could find a place of fondness for. Maybe it's because it's not mediated by a rabbi, and because you can find social justice issues in it, as well as, if you want, find religious divine intervention in it. But it seems to mean a lot of things for a lot of people, and like Sister Hills, your story of the Israeli occupation, it resists a simplification to one idea. And is that part of the appeal of what brought you to the Haggadah versus?
No. Credit where credit is due. Is I'm the translator, and spent the last 3 years just involved in I thought it was going to be a fun, a hipster Haggadah, as I was calling it, that it would be a light project, and then it just became all consuming to do the idea of doing justice to this text. But it was, 6 years ago, it's 3 years, Jonathan Safran Foer, it was a crazy idea of his, and I feel like that's even that idea, the way leaving Orthodoxy, I feel like the conservative kids are better at, I don't know, somehow, the traditional homes, I feel like when you don't pull things to extremes, there's he's not a religious man at all. I think it's bad to say, but he's a traditional in some ways. But the idea, he was really, he's the one who talked me into this project, and I was wildly resistant. And it's been very confusing to me to be so, and wonderful, actually. It's really informed everything else to be so deeply involved in text again. But I guess, yes, of Jewish holidays, I have to say it's the only one I do. I mean, if I can be around with my family for others, I'll go. But the only one on my own, like the last years where I've gone to a friend's for seder or something where I didn't get, down to where my family was. Yeah, it's like almost like the Thanksgiving of Jewish holidays. My favorite secular holiday in America is Thanksgiving. I feel like, and again, yes, there's a problem with even that holiday, and then, it's like Columbus Day, but the Native American, I know it's a problematic holiday, but
it does involve symbolic foods. And
well, that's what I'm saying. If we remove, this is my point of playing both sides. I can take apart Thanksgiving too. But yes, it's for every religion is welcome, and you can sit down at the table with family. And, it's one of those times where, as a deeply religious Jewish family, I felt, oh, this is a very American day for us. You put on the game and you eat your food, and but I feel like that's that same way where, as you just said, where whether you're super religious or radically secular, that Passover is the most living and malleable, and there's just a lot of room in there for finding your way in it. So yeah, sort of exactly like that on Thanksgiving. You want pumpkin pie, we do lemon meringue in my house, and it still counts as Thanksgiving with lemon meringue.
Are you working on anything new?
I am. I'm just again a decade with the novel, and I just could not dress myself and write in the same day. That's what that book demanded. I am so loving being overwhelmed and not sleeping. I mean, I worked, super hard on that. I'm not talking about working harder. I just mean making commitments to actual other people and working with the collaborations really excited me. I worked with this guy Baruch Thaler as a study partner during the Haggadah, who was a genius, and working with him and then bringing it to Jonathan as editor and going over the text, and the play, working with Nora Ephron and then Oscar Eustis and Barry Edelstein at the public. The idea of working with people has been so exciting. So yes, I've got a novel going. I know the next stories I want to write. There's about 20 different plays, one even a musical that I'd love to dig into. I've been making pottery, throwing pottery all fall. I am liking making things, and the more people involved and the more projects, the better. So if you have something on the radio you want to make with me, I will hang out here after and do it.
That sounds great. It was a pleasure having you on Between the Covers today, Nathan.
Thank you for such a close read, honestly.
So we were talking today with Nathan Englander, the author of What We Talk About When We Talk About Anne Frank. This is Between the Covers, and I'm David Naiman, your host.